we have a really distinguished group of commenters to follow here on these interesting proposals, and I'm going to introduce them very briefly because I think we'd much rather hear from them than perhaps hear their very distinguished qualifications. So the first speaker will be Scott Miller, who is Deputy Undersecretary for Collections and Interdisciplinary Support at the Smithsonian Institution. And this is a huge job, as you would expect. He is also the liaison between the Smithsonian and various other cultural and scientific organizations in the United States and around the world. The second speaker will be George Contreras, Adjunct Associate Professor of Human Genetics at the University of Utah and Associate Professor, College of Law at the University of Utah, and he is an internationally recognized authority in the area of standards essential patents and has been a leader in the development of the legal and policy aspects of genomic and biomedical research for some time. And then the third will be Dr. Shakil Bhatti, who is the first Secretary of the International Treaty on Plants Genetic Resources for Food and Agriculture at the FAO. He managed the launch of the multilateral system of access and benefit sharing, which we've been hearing about, and which at the moment facilitates more than 600 transfers of genetic material every day from the international gene banks alone. So I'll turn this over to Scott Miller. Thank you.
As you just heard, I am not a lawyer, but as a biologist, I'm responsible for some rather large collections as well as international research programs. And I was asked to make a few comments on these proposals and the information that's in the book, which I'm really pleased to do. I think what's laid out in the book provides a lot of interesting ways forward for a number of very challenging issues. I think about those challenges more from the standpoint of plants and animals than microbes per se. Some of my comments are going to be a little bit broader. I think as Jerry said, we have come through a period of great uncertainty and are still in a period of uncertainty about the legal framework for how you do international biomaterials transfer and research. Over the years that the Nagoya protocols were being negotiated, there was huge uncertainty in many countries, and many countries were in a well-intentioned but often misguided way trying to create their own law and policy, and it became chaos. Now there is an opportunity for those countries to actually settle on a common standard and go forward, and I'm hopeful that that will work, because I think this period of uncertainty has had sort of a chilling effect on international collaboration in research. There also, I think, during this time period has been an unfortunate disconnect, with the exception of sort of major commodity crops and the crop commons, between the sort of environment sector and the agriculture sector. Because agriculture, in the broad sense, takes in so much of biodiversity that was sort of left out of the thinking, and those agricultural applications, including also forestry, were kind of left out of many of the deliberations of the Convention on Biological Diversity. And one of the places, for example, that we see that are the issues around biological control agents, both the research and the implementation of biocontrol. I think going forward, much of what happens is going to be determined by how those individual countries implement their laws and policies regarding access and benefits sharing. And that will also impact what's possible in terms of multilateral agreements. I hope that they take into account Article 8 of the Nagoya Protocol, which deals with special considerations. And I want to point out David Schindel in the audience, who actually had a lot to do with the final wording of parts of that. But just very briefly, Article 8A suggests that countries should promote and encourage research of a non-commercial nature. Article 8B suggests that they should pay attention to how to deal with present and imminent emergencies that threaten or damage human, animal, or plant health. And 8C suggests that they should consider the importance of genetic resources for food and agriculture and their special role in food security. So to me, those three items in Article 8, when you link them back into the things that Jerry and Paul were just talking about, provide some opportunities for agreements in those spaces. But we are already seeing many conflicts between these different sectors. So for example, at the Smithsonian, we are regularly getting people from various countries asking for assistance in the identification of their agricultural pest or their biocontrol research project. And we have to say, we'll be happy to help, but you have to have all of the correct export permits. And even though they're from the Ministry of Agriculture, they're subject to the rules over in the Ministry of Environment. And frequently, the pest outbreak is long over by the time they actually get the permits to send us the insect to help them out. So I'm hopeful that we can find ways around those problems. As was also said, the fact that the U.S. government has not ratified the Convention on Biological Diversity really doesn't impact on our daily lives, in the sense that for any of us doing international work related to biodiversity, the CBD and the Nagoya protocols are the standard, and we just need to comply as part of doing business. But at least for animals and plants, there's also another factor that folks should keep in mind. This does, as far as I can tell, it does not apply to microbes, but there is something called the Lacey Act, which is enforced by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and APHIS, which basically requires that biological materials imported into the United States were collected and exported legally from the country of origin. So it's effectively the U.S. government enforcing foreign law. Was originally passed in 1900 to combat wildlife trafficking, but it's been amended and broadened multiple times. The most recent large expansion was in 2008 to include plants. But again, that means that the foreign laws that implement the Nagoya Protocol are going to be enforced by U.S. authorities. I think that there is a huge opportunity for continued experimentation in the development of multilateral agreements of multiple kinds. I think they're actually vital to the future of biodiversity research, as well as the management of both pest and beneficial organisms in agriculture and other fields. We heard about some good examples in the microbial community. The botanical gardens community has also been trying some experiments. And it's useful to note that in parallel, there's been a movement by many governments to recognize scientific collections, including, of course, living culture collections, as distributed infrastructure that supports science. It is the policy of the U.S. government under the America Competes Act of 2010, as implemented by OSTP. It's been the policy of the OECD, as embodied by the Global Science Forum project that had, in addition to doing some related things with microbial collections, also launched Scientific Collections International. And there's also a number of things going on in Europe in terms of scientific infrastructure. So it's a good time to sort of bring together the recognition that scientific collections are distributed infrastructure for research, and then with these other issues of access and benefit sharing. I think it's also important, speaking of collections, to keep in mind that the thrust under the Convention on Biological Diversity is about national resources, national capacity building, and it is very important to build those national resources in every country so that countries are able to do their own things. But I also believe that in biology there is still a very important continuing role for reference collections of global scope, where you have a regional or a world view of the diversity of that group of organisms in one place at one time, not only for research but also for response to a variety of issues, including the fact that the next invasive species can, sort of by definition, be any kind of organism from any place on the planet, and how are you going to actually rapidly identify sort of what that is. On the issue of the digital commons, again, a really interesting area where, as in the U.S. government, we are pushing forward with public access, open access. It has its own challenges. We have things like the Biodiversity Heritage Library that's put 50 million pages of legacy biodiversity literature online for free. We have wonderful examples provided by PubMed and GenBank of not only how to put literature online, but how to cross-link it with everything. But at the same time, how does that actually mesh with the idea of national ownership of genetic information like DNA sequences? Under the Convention on Biological Diversity, I think there's a lot of issues that still need to be resolved there. And just a final note that the whole concept of access and benefit sharing under the CBD is a two-way process. As my late colleague Glenn Hirsch liked to say, you can't have benefits if you don't have access. So it's a two-way thing. So thank you.